Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, I am beginning my trek through an era of Disney animation that holds a special place in my heart because it is the era that I technically grew up in. While start of the year I was born, continued for another 10 years, this of course is the Disney Renaissance. Now, in order to talk about this proper though, we have to at least do a little bit of a dive on what happened before the Renaissance. Now, in order to set the stage for this, we're going way back to the beginning. Talking about Walt Disney. No, we're not going into his childhood and early career and all that, just a little bit there. Now, Walt has always dealt with animation in one form or another. Early on, it was like the Alice shorts, then of course the creation of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, which him essentially getting screwed out of ownership with that is one of the things that led to the creation of Mickey Mouse in the Steamboat Willie short, and then other characters followed after. Now, in the 30s is when he decided, along with his company, that they were going to create the first feature-length animated film. Because at this point, animation seemed to be more a short thing. I mean, there were successful shorts. I mean, this is the era where the Fleischer animation shorts were big and popular. But like I said, they were shorts. You never had something that was like the feature-length presentation. And as they were making it, a lot of people were saying this is going to be a big flop. There's a reason that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs had the nickname of Disney's Folly. No one believed in it. But it came, it saw, it conquered. Got that honorary Oscar presented to Walt Disney by Shirley Temple. And of course, this film not only paved the way for future feature-length animated films, and without this film we probably would not have feature-length animation as we have it today, but it also allowed for other fantasy films that were aimed at a family audience to be successful, such as The Wizard of Oz. Now, this early era, you could call it the golden age of Disney's studio. It includes Snow White, you could throw Pinocchio in there, Fantasia, one of my favorite of Disney's films. But what killed the golden age is, of course, what really hurt Hollywood, other than like certain type of films, a lot at this point, and that was the breakout of World War II, which, since I mentioned it, that's part of the reason when you look at the numbers why The Wizard of Oz didn't do as well as it should have. I mean, there's other factors, like the film went over budget by a lot, and other stuff, but World War II did not help. And then Disney went into the propaganda films. You could put the propaganda films at the ass end of the golden age. And if you don't know what the propaganda films are, those are the ones like Strength Through Air Power. And of course the cartoon where we have Donald Duck working in a factory going Heil Hitler, which is just as funny as it sounds. Once the war ended and the economy built back up, that's what we could call the Silver Age. And yes, I am stealing my terminology from comic book history, because I think it fits here. The Silver Age is where we get a lot of the other classic films from when Disney was alive. And that, of course, is we get Cinderella, we get Alice in Wonderland, and yes, for these I am going off the top of my head, where the formula that Disney was following was sent. They were still doing a little bit of experimentation with it. This is where we start to see a little bit of them reusing animation, but it's not as prevalent as we're going to get in the next era. Now, this era is also good because this is where Disney started to do a lot more live action things. This is where we get classics like we get Treasure Island, which I have not seen. We get a film from my childhood, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, which my VHS I bought is somewhere over there on that shelf. Of course, 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which I have also not seen. And then, of course, another one of my childhood favorites, near the end of the part where Disney's alive, and that is Mary Poppins. But then, sadly, Disney passed away in 1966. And the Silver Age, you can say, continues for a little bit, but then once his brother Roy passes away in 71, that is really where we are into the Bronze Age. You could put the beginnings of that in between the two Disneys passing away, but definitely once Roy passed away, and the animation studio is now in the hands of Wolfgang Reitherman, who was one of the 9 old men and Disney's son-in-law was also involved in there. That is definitely where the Bronze Age came in. Now, with Reitherman, even without knowing a lot of this backstage thing and just looking at the films themselves, you could definitely tell once both Disneys were no longer there that there was a change in a creative direction and a creative philosophy with how these films were made. For starters, you could tell they were reusing animation a hell of a lot more, and it's a lot more obvious. I mean, just watch Jungle Book and Robin Hood back to back, you'll see what I mean. Not to say that the films were bad, but that's one thing you notice a bit more. And then, and this is the one that really you'll start to notice, especially if you watch this with an adult mind, is that they focused it even more on being family friendly at the expense sometimes of the villains. Now, I put my notes that they were neutered, but they were more focused on being a little bit more comedic and a little less, you know, and I'm just going to say the names of some of these villains and you'll see what I mean. For the Bronze Age, we had villains like, damn it, I forget her name, but it's the one crazy lady from The Rescuers. Of course, Prince John and the Sheriff of Nottingham from Robin Hood. Now compare those villains to the Wicked Stepmother from Snow White, to Miss Tremaine from Cinderella, to Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. Definitely Maleficent, classic villain. And tell me what's a little different there. Now, of course, the previous ages also had Hook, but his comedy was also balanced a little bit with how evil he was, and even in the musical for stage, he is a little bit of a comedic character, but it's tempered with how much of a dark character he is. So he's always had that kind of balance there, so it's just being true to the source material in a way. Now, the Bronze Age kept going forward because we still had other great films. I mean, we had the Aristocats. I mean, the villain there, of course, is a butler trying to kill the cats to get money. So that's still a little dark there. The early 80s is where we start to shift from the Bronze Age to what you could call the Dark Age. Now, before that, just the preferences, in the 70s is when Disney was even more focusing on live action films. We got films like Gus, which I only know that from the Walt Disney and You thing that used to be on the front of the VHSs. We still got musicals like Bedknobs and Broomsticks was made then, Pete's Dragon was made then, two films from my childhood that I still love. And other films I remember watching as a kid, The Cat from Outer Space, Shaggy Dog, That Darn Cat were made back then, so they were doing a lot of live action films. Parent Trap was the 60s, so that was another one than the previous one. I have to look at the year to see exactly when, but I think that was late 60s, so that one would be considered like a silver bronze transition one. But the reason it's called the Dark Age is because this is when the movies started to not make as much money. I mean, you can see that as a trend if you look at each film specifically, but this is definitely where it starts to hit them hard. And it didn't help that Disney was almost taken over at this point, so it's a couple factors. Now, the main one that people point to when they say that the movies were not making money is the Black Cauldron, and that really put the whole situation in doubt. But the other issue was that for the previous film, Fox and the Hound, 12 of their animators left, 17% of the department. And this was led, of course, by the legendary Don Bluth, who, of course, is a name everybody knows now because of the films he made after he left Disney. You know, Secret of Nim, which is a film he pitched to Disney before he left, and the film that he made that was the main competitor at this time. Of course, Land Before Time, American Tail, All Dogs Go to Heaven. All excellent films. But it's one of those things that's a big what if. What if those were all released as Disney films in that era, with Bluth directing and being the lead animator? Now, he probably would not have had as much creative freedom with some of the stuff that he did in them, but could you imagine? I mean, I'd love to be able to switch universes and see what the alternate Disney version of those films would look like, just to think. Now, 12 animators may not sound like a lot, but like I said, that's 17% of the department, and it ended up delaying the Fox and the Hound by 6 months. And of course, Blue going and being their main competitor. Early part of the 80s, he was really kicking their butt. Later in the 80s, they were going neck and neck, which I'll bring up in a second. Now, one good thing we get from the animation studio being a little bit in doubt at this point is that Disney finally relented, and they founded Disney Television television animation, excuse me. Which, of course, we got shows like DuckTales, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, Gummy Bears in the 80s, and then later on we get Goof Troop, Tailspin, Darkwing Duck, among others. So we do get that little silver lining. It just takes a little bit there. And of course we get the return of Roy Jr. because he had resigned in '84, but he decided to come back and help supervise the department. Now, since this is the 80s and Disney was really continuing forward with their live action films, especially under their Touchstone Pictures banner, they moved the animation headquarters from the main Burbank lot to Glendale, and it was there for the next 10 years. And around this point is also when Jeffrey Katzenberg joined the company. Katzenberg, years later would go and help found DreamWorks, so he'd become a Disney competitor. But here, he was working with them. So the main part of the Renaissance started under his watch. It's something we got to mention. And I remember on the VHSs, a lot of them that are over there, at the opening thing they would talk about it, they would actually have scenes of Katzenberg. That's how I know him by look, because I remember them showing him. And of course, this is also when Michael Eisner came into the picture, so we got Katzenberg and Eisner. That's really probably the only time I'm going to mention him in this one, but it's got to be mentioned. Now, Cauldron, like I said, put things in doubt. But the next two films help course correct stuff. And that, of course, are the films that you can call the pseudo-Renaissance films, which are the ones that really competed with Bluth, but really were starting to show influence from outside things. And that, of course, is The Great Mouse Detective and Oliver and Company, two other films from my childhood. Now, I didn't own them, but I watched them a lot when I got the chance to, mainly borrowing them or renting them. And there's a lot of things in there, like that bat scene at the beginning of Great Mouse Detector when I was a little kid. That used to scare the crap out of me. But this is an example of just because it's something that scares the crap out of a kid doesn't mean you need to neuter the film. That thing, the right amount of scary, and of course the bat gets his comeuppance later on in the film, so it works. And then, of course, Oliver and Company, probably one of the few films where, as an audience, you're going to cheer the death of dogs with the two Dobermans that are working for the main bad guy, so we don't care. And he gets a good comeuppance too in that one. And these are the ones that really fought with Bluth's films, and they went neck and neck for the box office. Now, there was one other film that was released around this time that we got to bring up. While it's not a fully animated film, it is definitely one of the ones that showed that animation was not dead. That, of course, is the love letter to not only classic animation, but classic Hollywood in LA in general, and that is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I mean, what other film are we going to get to see Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse pull some shenanigans? And, of course, Donald and Daffy Duck fight in a piano duel. Because this is the last time he'd worked with someone with a speech impediment. Now, with the previous two films, this is where we saw the Studio Ghibli, especially the Miyazaki influence, mentioned the Castle of Cagliostro, which I have not seen, but apparently that influenced the ending of The Great Mouse Detective. Now, the reason I bring up the Miyazaki influence is because on the second film in the Renaissance, it's going to be apt to bring up. Now, of course, after this we get to the Renaissance proper. And that's more a retroactive name that they called it, because they didn't really go into this whole thing being like, yeah, we're going to do a Renaissance of animation. I mean, if you try to do it like that, it's probably not going to work. But it's just retroactively what happened because of their creative focus being on the animation and them not wanting to cut corners like they did before. I mean, still, they'd probably go with the work smarter, not harder mentality when they could, but it's not like they're going to reuse animation to the same degree they were doing in the Bronze Age. And then, of course, the fact that everything from these films, for the most part, resonated with a mainstream audience, and of course the kids who were growing up at this time, that's why these were all hits, because just looking at this list of films, every one of these films is going to be a hit to a degree. It's only after the last one that we start to get the downward spiral that sadly led to the death of animation for Disney, except for one outlier, when it comes to 2D. And one other outlier years later. After that, it was all 3D. Part of that, of course, is during this time the rise of computer animation thanks to Pixar and Toy Story, but that'll probably be a separate thing when I tackle the Pixar films, especially the ones I have never watched. That will be an interesting one. Now, this is a list of the 10 films, and this is the order of release I'm going to go in. The Little Mermaid, The Rescuers Down Under, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan. All of these I watched repeatedly when I was a kid, and I loved every one of them. Little Mermaid I haven't seen in probably over 20 years at least. Rescuers Down Under, 10-ish. Beauty and the Beast, maybe 10. I think the last time I watched it was when I reviewed it one time on my old channel. Aladdin, it hasn't been that long, but it has been a while. Lion King, about 10 years since the last time I reviewed it. Pocahontas, probably 20 plus. And that'll probably be the one controversial one when I review it, depending on what my thoughts are. Hunchback, hasn't been that long, but it has been a while. And that's one of the few on here I did not actually own. But I did love it. It was probably my favorite of them. It's close with that Beauty and the Beast. We'll see how it is with this. Hercules, that one I owned on DVD. Mulan DVD, Tarzan, I got the VHS over there. Now, of these films, Lion King was the first one that I actually saw in theaters, and one of the first films I actually remember seeing in theaters. Supposedly I saw Beauty and the Beast in theaters, but I have no memory of it. Lion King, I have some vague memories of it, and I actually found where the theater I went and saw it at was, so it's nice to be able to actually put a spot to that memory. Pocahontas, I don't remember seeing in theaters, but I think I did. Hunchback, Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan, I all remember seeing them in theaters. I remember who I went with. Hunchback, I went with my abuela. Mulan with my grandmother. Hercules, I went with my abuela. Tarzan went with my grandmother and one of my brothers. Now, this Renaissance, they're still good, but like I said, they started the spiral down. I mean, the one immediately afterwards, if I remember correctly without putting it in my notes, was Emperor's New Groove. But just from what you can loosely think of from that production history, you can kind of see why. Now, the success of the Renaissance inspired other studios to continue forward. I mean, Blues continued. I mean, his early 90s ones, people don't really consider the best of his output. Troll in Central Park, probably the main one there. No comment, though. But of course, he did Anastasia, classic, which technically now, due to them owning Fox, is retroactively a Disney movie. And that one I saw in theaters, that was a good one. Cats Don't Dance, Quest for Camelot, and then, of course, DreamWorks' classic Prince of Egypt. And then, of course, it also led to them starting to do sequels that were non-theatrical for their popular films. Of course, they started, with Aladdin, The Return of Jafar. And it just continued onward. And it just seemed like every animated film was getting a direct-to-video sequel produced by Disney Movie Tunes. I mean, Little Mermaid had a sequel, which I've never seen. Rescuers Down Under was already a sequel, but they were planning a third one, but I'll talk about that when I review that film. Beauty and the Beast got technically a sequel, but it's more like a collection of shorts for an unrealized TV show, but it also had its own midquel, takes place during Christmas, with Tim Curry as the villain. Aladdin had 2 sequels. Lion King had a sequel that was essentially a lion adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. Pocahontas had a sequel, which that one I'll talk about when I talk about that film. Hunchback had a sequel. Hercules almost had a sequel, but that got nixed. Mulan had a sequel. Tarzan had a sequel and a TV show spinoff. That was another thing. A lot of these had spinoffs too. Aladdin had a TV show spinoff. Little Mermaid had a TV show spinoff. And then, like I mentioned, a lot of the classic films had them. I mean, Fox and the Hound had a spinoff. Bambi had a spinoff. That was another one I didn't mention earlier, Bambi. I mean, that one. How could I forget mentioning Bambi when I tackled the earlier film stuff? I mean, Bambi's mom! And, of course, Old Yeller with the live-action ones. 2 films apparently scarred childhoods, but I can only talk about Bambi. I never saw Old Yeller. Some people right now are going, I just want to talk to them. Well, that about does it, though, for the overview. And, of course, watching these films, I'll be tackling them in release order. So, next time we're talking about the Disney Renaissance, it'll be my re-review and revisit of The Little Mermaid. We're going to see how my thoughts and opinions on that film are about 20 years after I last saw it, and see if watching it with an adult mind, there is that one part of the story that everyone talks about when they make jokes about the film. If I do agree with the joke consensus when it comes to the romance subplot. Till then, everybody.